I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are part of this massive, decades-long group project.
Oh, everyone's favorite kind of project.
Right, the absolute worst. But imagine you and your team have been working on this single assignment for, let's say, over 30 years. And at the end of it, the grades are posted on the board, and you get an A+ mark.
Okay, so total win.
Exactly. You're at the very top of the class. You're this shining example for everyone else to follow. You feel, prosperous, successful, completely untouchable.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop here.
And there it is. So as you're celebrating, the professor hands you a sealed envelope. You open it, assuming it's like a certificate or a bonus, and it's a bill.
Ah.
Yeah. It turns out, to get that A+ spark, you didn't just use your own resources. You secretly spent the entire operating budget for the next 10 generations of your family to achieve that grade.
Wow. That kind of changes the mood in the room.
Totally changes it. Suddenly, that A+ feels a whole lot different, and it forces you to ask a really uncomfortable question. If your success requires bankrupting the future, did you, actually succeed at all?
I mean, that's the core of it, right? It forces a complete reevaluation of the metrics we even use to define progress.
Right.
Because for a very long time, global society operated under this fairly simplistic assumption. If the economy is growing, if the gross domestic product is going up, then the people must be doing well.
The rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing.
Exactly. But that A+ grade you just described, that is essentially what happens when we look at human development through a singular traditional lens.
Yeah.
We see the achievement, but we're entirely blind to the leverage and the debt used to finance it.
Which brings us to our mission for today.
Yeah, because knowledge is most valuable when we look at the whole picture, not just, the flattering angles. We have to look at the ledger in its entirety.
Right. And today, you and I are diving into one of the most flattering but ultimately complex data sets available on human progress. We are taking a deep dive into the United Nations Human Development Index. Specifically, we have this massive, meticulously tracked data set covering Canada's performance from 1990 all the way to 2023.
It's a goldmine of data.
It really is. And our mission here, for you listening, is to unpack the illusion of pure prosperity. We're going to look at the spectacular successes of a world leader in human development, and then we're going to calculate the hidden receipts.
The environmental debt, the social gaps.
Exactly, the actual funding of that success. We're looking at the raw data tracking the traditional Human Development Index, the HDI. But we also have the inequality-adjusted metrics, the gender inequality and development indices, and this is the big one, the newly introduced planetary pressures-adjusted HDI.
The PHDI, yeah, the contrast between these numbers is staggering.
It's wild. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the baseline, because before we can critique the A+ grade, we have to understand how it was earned.
Right, we need to start with the foundational success story, represented by the traditional HDI. Because before we can talk about the hidden costs, we have to genuinely understand the scale of the societal achievement over the last 3 decades.
Which is significant.
Highly significant.
Right.
So the Human Development Index, it was created to move us away from just looking at money. It asks 3 basic questions.
Yeah.
Are people living long and healthy lives? Are they acquiring knowledge? And do they have a decent standard of living?
Health, education, and wealth.
Exactly. And when we look at Canada's data set through that specific lens, we see this steady, just formidable climb. Back in 1990, the score was 0.865, but by 2023, it reached a peak of 0.939.
0.939. That's incredibly high.
It is. It secures Canada's spot at globally ranked 16th place out of nearly 200 countries.
And looking at the historical data in our sources, there was actually a high water mark early on. In 1991, Canada actually hit global rank number 2.
Number 2 in the world.
Which is crazy, and since then, it's settled into that 16th position. But whether it's 2nd or 16th, an HDI of 0.939 places a country firmly in the what they call very high human development tier.
It's the top bracket.
Right, but I want to unpack what that actually means mechanically. Like, when a citizen wakes up in a country with a 0.939 HDI, what does that infrastructure actually look like around them?
Well, it looks like deeply entrenched systemic stability. It means that the institutions governing health, education, and economic output are highly institutionalized. and resilient.
Resilient how?
So when you look at the 30-year graph of this climb, it is a relentless upward slope. You see these micro dips around global events like the dot-com bust in the early 2000s or the 2008 financial crisis.
Sure, the usual economic shocks.
Right, but the recovery is always swift, and it pushes the baseline even higher. It indicates a society that has built enough redundant safety nets and economic shock absorbers to weather massive global shifts without collapsing its citizens to basic quality of life.
It's almost like looking at a blue chip stock.
That's a great way to put it.
Like a foundational investment that just keeps paying dividends year after year, regardless of market volatility. But, and this is where it gets interesting, a rising overall number can obscure a lot of turbulence underneath.
Oh, absolutely.
So to understand how that 0.939 is actually generated, we need to look at the three specific pillars you mentioned: health, education, and wealth. Let's start with the health pillar.
Okay.
The UN measures this through life expectancy at birth. In 1990, a Canadian could expect to live roughly 77.4 years, but by 2023, that number had grown to 82.6 years.
Which is, that is 5.2 extra years of human life added to the average citizen's lifespan in just over 3 decades. Demographically, that is a monumental shift.
5 extra years on average, that's massive.
It reflects so many things. The near eradication of certain infectious diseases, massive advancements in cardiovascular and cancer treatments, severe reductions in smoking rates.
Oh, right, the anti-smoking campaigns of the 90s and 2000s.
Huge impact.
Yeah.
And overall improvements in occupational safety. It basically means the medical infrastructure has evolved from merely treating acute trauma, like fixing a broken leg, to effectively managing long-term chronic conditions.
Right, and 5 extra years means a fundamentally different societal structure. It means entirely new phases of life being normalized, second careers after retirement, extended relationships with grandchildren.
Exactly.
But the data also shows us that even a system designed to produce 82-year lifespans is not, invincible. The sources highlight a very noticeable drop during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes.
Between 2020 and 2022, life expectancy fell from 82.3 years down to 81.2 years.
And we really need to pause on that drop, because a decrease of 1.1 years in national life expectancy might sound like a small decimal shift to a layperson.
Like, oh, you lost a year, big deal.
Right. But in actuarial and demographic terms, an entire population of nearly 40 million people losing over a year of average life expectancy in a 24-month window is a statistical earthquake.
Wow.
Because life expectancy at birth is an incredibly sluggish metric. It takes massive systemic forces to move it even a fraction of a year in either direction. So that 1.1-year drop represents a catastrophic volume of premature mortality.
Right, because to drag the mathematical average down by a full year, you aren't just losing people at age 80 a few months early.
No, not at all.
You are losing a significant number of people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s to drag that entire average down.
Exactly. But looking at the data from 2023, it shows a sharp turnaround. The life expectancy rebounded by 1.4 years, jumping back up to 82.6.
Which is incredible.
Which brings us right back to the concept of systemic resilience. The rebound to 82.6 years in 2023 shows a healthcare system absorbing a historic shock, adapting its protocols, rolling out mass interventions, and aggressively restoring its baseline.
The health pillar bent severely, but it didn't permanently break.
Precisely.
Okay, so the health engine is doing its job. People are living longer, more durable lives. Now let's look at the second pillar: education.
My favorite pillar.
And the data tracks two distinct metrics here. The first is mean years of schooling, which is the average number of years adults aged 25 and older have already spent in formal education.
Right.
In 1990, that was 10.7 years. By 2023, it climbed to 13.9 years. So the adult population, on average, has moved from not quite finishing high school to having a couple of years of college or university under their belt.
Yes, the historical stock of knowledge has deepened. But the second metric is actually far more indicative of where the society is heading. The expected years of schooling for a child entering the education system today is holding strong at roughly 15.9 years.
Wait, almost 16 years of continuous schooling?
Almost 16 years.
That means a 5-year-old walking into kindergarten today is statistically expected to remain in the classroom until they are 21 years old.
Mechanically, this illustrates the total transition into a knowledge-based economy. To maintain that 0.939 HDI, the economy no longer requires raw physical labor as its primary input. It requires highly specialized cognitive labor.
Sure, you need programmers, engineers, analysts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But think about the invisible infrastructure required to make 15.9 years of schooling the national standard. It requires a massive public and private apparatus to keep an entire generation out of the full-time labor force for the first 2 decades of their lives.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it that way.
You are feeding, housing, and educating millions of young adults who are not yet producing taxable economic output.
And that leads to a massive structural tension, doesn't it? Because if everyone in this society is living to 82.6 years old and they aren't fully entering the workforce until they're 21 or 22 because they're in university,
Right.
the actual window of prime earning years is being squeezed from both ends. You have a later start to your career because of education, and you have decades of post-retirement life to fund.
Mm-hmm.
That inherently changes what it costs to simply exist in this society. Like, how does a country finance that?
They finance it by exponentially increasing the output of the third pillar, wealth. And the economic data provided in our sources is staggering.
Let's hear it.
The gross national income, or GNI, per capita, which is adjusted for purchasing power parity, it skyrocketed from $36,257 in 1990 to a high of $56,952 in 2022, settling slightly at $54,688 in 2023.
Okay, let's quickly define purchasing power parity, or PPP, just so we are totally clear on what that $54,688 actually represents.
Good idea.
Because we aren't just looking at the raw exchange rate of Canadian dollars to US dollars. PPP adjusts the income based on what a specific basket of goods, groceries, housing, basic services actually costs in that country.
Right. It measures the true standard of living.
So when we say the GNI per capita is $54,688, we mean that the average citizen has the equivalent purchasing power of someone making $54,688 in the United States. It's a measure of actual usable wealth.
Precisely. It controls for inflation and local cost of living.
Mm.
And looking at the trajectory, despite a sharp drop during the 2008 financial crisis and another income shrinkage during the 2020 lockdowns, the overall wealth generation of the country has expanded massively.
So the money is there.
The total volume of capital is more than sufficient to fund the 16 years of education and the 82-year lifespans. The engine is producing massive amounts of prosperity.
And here's where we find the first major crack in the facade. Because generating wealth and distributing wealth are two completely different mechanical processes.
Completely different.
The traditional HDI takes that $54,688, divides it evenly across the population on a spreadsheet, and calls it a success. But the UN also tracks a metric called the inequality adjusted HDI, or IHDI.
Yes.
And when you apply the reality of inequality to Canada's 2023 data, that pristine score of 0.939 drops to an IHDI of 0.867.
That represents a 7.66% mathematical loss in human development, entirely due to unequal distribution. The average lived experience of a citizen is almost 8% lower than what the national economic data suggests it should be.
Let's visualize how that loss happens mechanically, because numbers can get a bit abstract.
Yeah, let's round it.
Think of the nation's prosperity as a massive municipal water system. At the main reservoir, you have 0.939 million gallons of pure prosperity ready to be distributed.
Okay, I'm with you.
But the pipeline network carrying that water to individual neighborhoods is flawed. Some neighborhoods have massive, high-pressure pipes. Other neighborhoods have narrow, leaky pipes. By the time you turn on the tap in the average home, 7.66% of the water pressure has been lost to the systemic inefficiency of inequality.
That's a great analogy.
You don't feel the 0.939 at your kitchen sink.
Yep.
You feel the 0.867.
And what the sources allow us to do is isolate exactly which pipes in that system are leaking the most, because the IHDI breaks down the inequality loss into the 3 original pillars.
So where are the leaks?
Well, for education, the inequality loss is incredibly low at just 2.2%.
Okay, so public schooling is pretty equitable.
Yes. For life expectancy, the inequality loss is 4.2%.
Now, let me push back on that 4.2% for a second. Canada is famous for its universal healthcare system.
Right.
The core premise is that medical care is provided based on need, not the ability to pay. So if the healthcare system is universal, why is there a 4.2% inequality gap in how long people live? Shouldn't that pipe be perfectly sealed?
In theory, yes. Clinical access is universal. If you break your arm, you go to the hospital, you get a cast, you don't pay out of pocket.
Exactly.
But life expectancy is dictated by social determinants of health, not just access to an emergency room. That 4.2% inequality stems from geography. The massive disparity in healthcare outcomes between a dense urban center like Toronto and remote northern or rural communities where specialist access is sparse.
Oh, right. Canada's huge.
It's massive. And it reflects systemic disparities faced by marginalized and indigenous populations who often face structural barriers to preventive care, clean drinking water in some remote areas, and food security. Universal insurance covers the doctor's visit, but it doesn't eradicate the environmental and systemic inequities that make people sick in the first place.
That makes perfect sense. The hospital is free, but surviving the conditions that put you in the hospital is heavily dependent on your zip code.
Exactly.
However, 4.2% and 2.2% are still remarkably low on a global scale. The social safety nets for health and education are holding up reasonably well. So what is devouring the rest of the index?
The primary culprit is the wealth pillar. The loss due to income inequality is a massive 15.9%.
15.9%.
Yeah, the total volume of wealth in the country is growing, but the distribution mechanism is highly stratified.
So mechanically, how does an economy generate $54,688 per person, but suffer nearly 16% loss in utility due to income inequality?
It happens when the mechanisms of wealth generation decouple from wage growth.
Unpack that for me.
So in a deeply knowledge-based economy, a significant portion of the wealth being generated is capital gains, the appreciation of real estate, the growth of equity markets, corporate profits.
Okay.
If you own assets, your wealth compounds rapidly. But if your primary source of income is hourly labor or a stagnant salary, your purchasing power is eroded by the rising cost of those exact same assets, particularly housing. The 54,688 average is heavily skewed by the massive accumulation of capital at the very top of the economic ladder.
So to go back to our pipeline analogy, the water pressure isn't just leaking, it's being actively diverted.
Right.
The pipes leading to the asset-owning class are exponentially wider than the pipes leading to the wage-earning class. You can have a master's degree fulfilling the education pillar and be perfectly healthy. But if the cost of housing and groceries is inflating faster than your salary, your personal human development feels stagnant. The friction you feel at the grocery store checkout is that 15.9% income inequality tax eating into your daily life.
Exactly. And this proves that high human development can comfortably coexist with significant economic stratification. The social safety nets socialize the basic costs of health and knowledge, but the economic market privatizes the vast majority of the wealth gains.
Socialized costs, privatized gains.
Yes, and to truly understand how deep this stratification goes, we have to look at the inequality data through an even more specific lens: the Gender Inequality Index, or GII, and the Gender Development Index, the GDI.
This is where the data gets incredibly complex and, frankly, contradictory.
It really does.
Because if we look at the Gender Inequality Index, which measures reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market, Canada is an absolute powerhouse.
World class.
The GII value dropped from 0.160 in 1990 down to an astonishing 0.052 in 2023. That places Canada at global rank #1 for gender equality.
It is a remarkable trajectory. The sources show a key turning point around 2018 when the index value first dropped below 0.080. And then it just accelerated to the current baseline. This rank of #1 is built on massive structural improvements.
Like what?
Well, we see reproductive health stabilized with a very low maternal mortality ratio of 11 deaths per 100,000 live births. The adolescent birth rate plummeted from 25.4 births per 1,000 women aged 15 to 19 in 1990 down to just 4.8 in 2023.
That's a huge drop.
It is. These are the fundamental biological and health baselines required for women to fully participate in society.
And the political empowerment metrics follow suit, right? The share of parliamentary seats held by women rose from 21.2% in 1990 to 35.8% in 2023.
Yes, a steady increase in political representation.
But the most staggering statistic in this entire section is education. The data shows that 96.1% of adult women have reached at least a secondary level of education, which is virtually tied with men at 96.5%.
They're essentially at parity there.
But when we look at the expected years of schooling, women are actually outpacing men.
Yes, the expected years of schooling for women in 2023 is roughly 16.4 years, compared to 15.3 years for men.
Over a full year or more.
Women are statistically expected to spend an entire extra year in formal education. They possess an immense volume of the society's knowledge capital. And theoretically, in the knowledge-based economy we just discussed, higher educational attainment should mechanically translate to higher economic power.
Right. If you go to school longer, you should make more money.
That's the theory.
And that brings us to the Gender Development Index, the GDI. The UN categorizes Canada in Group 1, which means high equality in HDI achievements between women and men. The overall GDI score is 0.991. The female HDI is 0.934, and the male HDI is 0.943.
They look almost perfectly balanced.
on the surface, but when you crack open that GDI score and look at the income pillar, the numbers make absolutely no sense.
The contradiction is glaring. We have established that women are highly empowered politically, they have robust health protections, and they are acquiring more formal education than men. Yet, the estimated gross national income per capita for women in 2023 is $45,016.
Okay.
For men, it is $64,494.
A nearly $20,000 gap in average income.
Yeah.
How does the systemic machinery produce a result where a demographic gets a full extra year of university education but earns $20,000 less? Like, some people might argue that this is just a matter of choice, that women are simply choosing to enter lower paying fields. But a $20,000 gap across 20 million people cannot just be a coincidence of personal preference, right? What is the actual mechanical driver of this chasm?
It is not a coincidence of preference. It is a structural feature of the labor market and how society values specific types of work. The $20,000 gap is driven by two primary mechanisms: the systemic undervaluing of care work and the motherhood penalty.
Okay, let's look at care work first.
Women disproportionately dominate fields like nursing, early childhood education, elder care, and social work.
The backbone of society.
Exactly. These are the exact roles that maintain the health and education pillars of the HDI. The society literally requires this labor to function. However, the economic market historically treats care work as a social service, rather than a wealth-generating enterprise.
Oh.
So it suppresses the wages in those sectors compared to male-dominated fields like finance, engineering, or resource extraction.
So the very people building the high HDI scores are being economically penalized for doing so.
Yes.
That's brutal, but what about the motherhood penalty? Because even in high-paying corporate sectors, the wage gap persists.
The motherhood penalty is a compounding mathematical loss over a 40-year career.
Compounding.
Yes. In a corporate environment, the years where an employee is expected to aggressively climb the ladder, put in extreme overtime, and secure major promotions typically happen between the ages of 25 and 35.
Which perfectly overlaps with the biological window for having children.
Precisely. When a woman takes a year or two out of the workforce for maternity leave, she isn't just losing that year's salary, she is losing a cycle of promotions, a cycle of raises, and the compound interest on those raises for the rest of her career.
And when she returns, the structural demands of the corporate world, the expectation of 50-hour work weeks and inflexible scheduling often force a shift toward part-time work or less demanding roles.
Right.
Because someone has to accommodate the unpaid domestic labor of raising a child, which still disproportionately falls on women.
Exactly. And we see the footprint of this in the labor force participation rates. The female labor force participation rate is 61.6%, compared to 69.7% for men.
So an 8% gap.
Nearly 8% of the female workforce is completely sidelined, often absorbing the unpaid care labor that the state or the market fails to provide. So, while Canada ranks #1 globally in the Gender Inequality Index because women have the capacity to succeed the health, the political rights, the education, the $20,000 income gap proves that the economic market still operates on legacy software.
Legacy software that actively penalizes the biological and social realities of womanhood.
Well said.
It is a profound limitation in how we measure success. I mean, we have an engine generating an HDI of 0.939, but we've now discovered it leaks 15.9% of its wealth to general income inequality, and it systematically underpays its most educated demographic by $20,000 a year.
We are starting to see the true cost of that A+ grade.
But up until this point, we've only been discussing the human ledger. We've been looking at how human beings distribute the prosperity amongst themselves. But there is a third party in this transaction.
The silent partner.
A stakeholder that doesn't get a paycheck, doesn't get a vote in parliament, but holds the ultimate bill for all this development.
The planet.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the core revelation of this entire deep dive. If we want to evaluate the true sustainability of the Canadian model, we have to introduce the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, the PHDI.
And this is where the entire narrative of Canadian prosperity violently flips upside down.
It's a total paradigm shift.
We started this deep dive marveling at that .939 score and the global rank of 16th. But the traditional HDI has a fatal philosophical flaw, doesn't it? It treats the Earth as an infinite externality.
Exactly. The traditional HDI assumes that as long as humans are living to 82, staying in school for 16 years, and making $54,000, human development is succeeding. It completely ignores what is being ripped out of the ground or what is being pumped into the atmosphere to fuel that lifestyle.
Out of sight, out of mind?
But the planetary pressures adjusted HDI finally introduces an accounting system for nature. It takes that traditional score and adjusts it based on the country's carbon dioxide emissions and its material footprint per capita.
And when you apply that ecological penalty to Canada's data, the results are devastating. The 2023 HDI of 0.939 crashes to a PHDI of exactly 0.643.
0.643. To put that in perspective, that is a massive 31.5% chunk of human development, completely wiped out by planetary pressure.
Over 30% just gone.
The illusion of cost-free prosperity evaporates. In statistical terms, taking a 31.5% penalty on a composite index like this is an absolute freefall. It exposes the fact that a massive portion of the nation's wealth and health is heavily subsidized by unsustainable environmental extraction.
And the global rankings reflect that freefall perfectly. Because of this ecological adjustment, Canada drops a staggering 85 places in the global ranking.
85 places.
They go from being ranked 16th in the world under the traditional HDI, plummeting down to 101st place under the PHDI.
It's just wild to think about.
And let me frame this for you, the listener. Imagine you are a 16th place Olympic marathon runner. You are elite. You are on the world stage celebrating your incredible stamina.
Right.
But right before the medal ceremony, the judges review the tape and realize you used a gas-powered motorcycle for half the race.
Just casually riding a motorcycle.
Right, so they penalize you and drop you 85 places down the roster. You aren't elite anymore, you just had an unfair mechanical advantage. That motorcycle is our environmental consumption.
It is a devastating drop. Falling from 16th to 101st completely recontextualizes the nation's identity on the global stage. It shifts the label from a global leader in human development to a global debtor in ecological terms.
Wow.
The 82-year life expectancy, the 16 years of schooling, the $54,000 income, they're entirely reliant on borrowing from the planet's future stability. The development model is heavily leveraged against the ecosystem.
So we need to look at the engine of that motorcycle. What exactly is causing a 31.5% penalty? What are the specific ecological receipts driving this massive subtraction?
The penalty is calculated based on two incredibly heavy metrics.
Yeah.
The first is carbon dioxide emissions per capita based on production. According to the data, Canada's emissions sit at 14.16 tons per person.
14.16 tons.
Yeah, this is the carbon cost of heating millions of homes through harsh winters, powering heavy industries, driving vast distances across a sprawling continent, and extracting fossil fuels like the oil sands.
Sure, it takes a lot of energy to run a country that big and that cold.
14.16 tons is a heavy carbon footprint, but it is actually the second metric that delivers the truly lethal blow to the PHDI score.
The material footprint.
Yes, the material footprint is an astonishing 40.28 tons per capita.
40.28 tons per person every single year.
Every single year.
I really want you, listening to this, to try and conceptualize what 40 tons of physical matter actually looks like. It is incredibly hard for the human brain to visualize that scale.
It's mass.
40 tons is the weight of roughly 7 adult male elephants. Or imagine 20 average-sized sedans piled up in a massive heap in your driveway. That is the sheer mass of physical material that must be violently extracted from the Earth's crust every single year just to sustain the lifestyle of one single average Canadian citizen.
It's almost unbelievable when you put it like that.
How is that physically possible? What is making up those 40 tons?
The material footprint tracks the raw materials extracted globally to meet a country's domestic final demand. It is divided into four main categories.
Okay, lay them on me.
First, you have biomass. This is the millions of tons of timber logged to build suburban homes, the massive scale of agricultural crops grown for food, and the forestry products used for paper and packaging.
Okay, so wood and food, that makes sense.
Second, you have fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And remember, these aren't just extracted to be burned for energy. Fossil fuels are the foundational ingredient for every piece of plastic, every synthetic fertilizer used in agriculture, and every synthetic textile you wear.
Right, your smartphone case, the dashboard of your car, the synthetic fibers in your winter coat, that all originates as extracted petroleum.
Exactly. Now, the third category is metal ores. The iron mined to build the steel frames of high-rises, the copper wired through every home for electricity, and the rare earth metals like lithium and cobalt aggressively mined to build electric vehicle batteries and electronics.
So everything technological and structural.
Yes. And finally, the largest, heaviest, and most invisible category, non-metallic minerals.
What does that mean?
This is the staggering volume of sand, gravel, and limestone blasted out of quarries to pour the millions of tons of concrete required to build highways, parking lots, and the endless urban sprawl that connects the country.
Concrete.
Concrete.
So it's the invisible weight of modern life.
Yeah.
When you buy a laptop, your personal material footprint isn't just the 3 pounds of aluminum and glass sitting on your desk.
Oh, not even close.
It is the thousands of pounds of earth that had to be excavated, crushed, and chemically refined just to isolate the trace amounts of rare metals inside the microchips. It is the concrete poured to build the massive factory in Asia that assembled it. It's the bunker fuel burned by the massive cargo ship that brought it across the Pacific Ocean to a Canadian port. All of that upstream industrial weight is mathematically assigned to your personal 40.28-ton ledger.
Precisely. The material footprint exposes the hyper-consumerist metabolism of the economy. And this raises an important question, perhaps the most critical tension of this entire analysis. Canada is a uniquely massive, incredibly cold, heavily dispersed country. It fundamentally requires more energy to heat a home in a northern winter than it does in a temperate climate.
True.
It requires more infrastructure, more asphalt, and more fuel to transport basic food supplies across a continent-sized nation. Geography dictates a certain unavoidable baseline of higher material use. But does geography excuse 40.28 tons per capita?
It can't. I mean, you can blame the winter for the heating bill, but you can't blame the snow for planned obsolescence.
Exactly.
You can't blame geography for a culture that throws away electronics every 2 years, or an urban planning model that forces every suburban family to own 2 gas-powered SUVs just to buy groceries. The geography is fixed, but the 40-ton consumption rate is a behavioral and economic choice. The economy is predicated on a linear model: extract, consume, and discard.
And that linear model is what generates the 31.5% penalty. So the monumental challenge facing policymakers is, how does a highly developed nation even begin to lower that 40-ton footprint without sacrificing the HDI gains they've spent 30 years building? How do you maintain the 82-year life expectancy and the $54,000 income while drastically shrinking the amount of earth you consume?
How do you get off the motorcycle and still finish the race?
Yes.
Because you cannot just tell a population that has grown accustomed to the safety and comfort of an A+ human development score that they need to endure a massive drop in their standard of living to save the planet. People will not voluntarily accept a regression in their HDI.
Nor should they have to. The goal of the 21st century is not regression. It is decoupling. We must decouple human prosperity from environmental degradation.
But how?
It requires a total systemic overhaul. It means transitioning the energy grid to zero carbon sources, certainly, but tackling the 40-ton material footprint is much harder. It requires moving from a linear economy to a circular economy.
So recycling.
Beyond just recycling, it means mandating that products be designed for repair and infinite reuse rather than ending up in landfills. It means reimagining urban spaces so they don't require tons of personal steel and concrete to navigate, investing heavily in mass transit and dense, walkable communities. And it requires agricultural practices that regenerate the topsoil rather than chemically depleting it.
It requires rewiring the entire machinery of that wealth pillar we discussed earlier. Because right now, that wealth engine is incredibly inefficient.
Very inefficient.
Let's look at the totality of what we've unpacked today. When you synthesize all the sources, all the data points, a very clear, very sobering picture emerges. Canada has masterfully hacked the traditional human development game.
They really did.
They followed the rules of the 20th century perfectly. They built an engine that produces incredible longevity, unparalleled education, and massive volumes of capital.
But this deep dive reveals the hidden ledger. The engine runs on a heavy inequality tax, socializing the basic health and education systems, but allowing 15.9% of the economic utility to be hoarded at the very top.
Yep.
It operates on a systemic gender penalty, utilizing the massive educational capital of women while underpaying them by $20,000 a year due to outdated corporate structures and the undervaluation of care work.
And most crucially, the entire system is operating on a completely unsustainable environmental credit card. The drop from 16th to 101st place, the 31.5% collapse in the PHDI, is the planet finally calling in the debt. So why does a deep dive into Canadian statistical data matter to your life? Why should you care about these numbers?
Because it's not just about Canada.
Exactly. Because this data set is a perfect, highly detailed mirror for the entire developed world. It challenges us to look deeply at our own personal and societal definitions of success. If your personal prosperity, your A+ on the group project requires an outsized toll on your mental health, your community's equity, or the physical earth beneath your feet, is it true prosperity?
That's the question.
If the global standard for very high human development requires digging up 7 elephants worth of earth per person every single year, we are operating on borrowed time.
We really are. The traditional HDI told us exactly what we wanted to hear, that we were winning the game. But the inequality-adjusted HDI, the Gender Development Index, and especially the planetary pressures-adjusted HDI tell us what we desperately need to know.
That the rules of the game itself are fatally flawed.
Exactly. And that leaves us with a final, vital provocation to consider. The ultimate goal of our generation is to make the traditional HDI and the planetary HDI match. We have to close that massive 31.5% gap.
And to do that, we have to fundamentally redefine what it means to be a developed nation. Are we brave enough to open that envelope, look at the staggering bill we are handing to the next 10 generations, and finally change how we fund our success? Must true progress always require extraction? Or is there a way to grow upward, to live longer, to learn more, without digging deeper into the earth? Think about that 40-ton motorcycle. The ride has been incredible, but it's time to learn how to run on our own 2 feet.